good evening and welcome to the Super License F1 podcast. My name is Rodney.
And my name is Zach.
It's the summer break, Zach. I want you to paint a picture for all the listeners of what you've been doing over the summer.
I've been outdoors. You know what? I've just been doing my normal thing, but doing it outside. So drinking in pubs, but in the outdoor parts, reading books, but at the park instead of in the home, taking the iPad to the park and watching Netflix, but instead of watching it at home, I'll watch it in the park. So it's just outdoor Zach. It's the summer of Zach, really.
It really is. I'm feeling it. I've been, rugging myself up in a jacket made out of an animal's fur and like fishing in a very small hole that I cut in the ice, all that kind of stuff. It is freaking freezing in Melbourne, but the sun is breaking through. We're only a few weeks away from it being, tolerable. Not good, but tolerable.
You mean in a Formula One state of mind, or do you just mean the weather as well, or both?
It's been nice to be in a relaxed state of mind regarding Formula One. And obviously, we've got a big summer break show ahead. We're going to be talking to a very special guest who we'll get to in a sec. But this is just in case you haven't realized, this is the relaxed version of the Super License podcast. If you've never heard the show before, if you wanted to come back for a race recap, it's usually just as silly, just as loose, but a little bit more race focused, I suppose. But this week is just it's like a walk through the park at dusk.
Yeah, it's a very relaxed, just a bit of question and answer. There's no quiz this week. It's just chat between mates about Formula One, which is probably what you tune in for anyway. But there's no script. There's no Google Doc this time. It's just chat, which is good. I feel like that's what you need in the mid-season break. It's the between seasons, the winter break is the one where you're really itching for Formula One. But mid-season, it's a time to reflect. It's a time to grow. It's a time to just kind of lean in to some of the other parts of the sport or around the culture that are not so specific about who did what on corner 7, lap 36 this week, which is, usually the level of detail that we have.
It's not an analytical deep dive, but we are going to dive pretty deep into pretty much the only news story that we've had in the last 3 weeks to talk about since the last race. But obviously this is going to get us through until the next race in Belgium, which I'm on the record as saying that's one of my favorite races. But the excitement is sort of going to start to build in the next week or so when the teams arrive and you get those "It's race week" tweets. That's going to be fun. But for now, we've got a little casual chat just to stretch our legs a little bit, just get through the summer break. And well, boy, Zach, we have a special guest this week who he knows how to talk F1.
Oh, he really does. And whenever we have guests on, I always feel like slightly underdone. That I'm like, oh man, look how succinct they are, and look how great they are, and it was just so good to have another voice on. So it's the one that doesn't sound like us is the person who's on the call.
That's the one you're listening for. I'm me. Zach is the other guy right now. You're listening for a third voice. Let us get to our F1 chat with our special guest.
Welcome to F1 Chats.
So joining us this week to talk about all things for the year so far and to hopefully bring some wild predictions for the rest of the season is Spanners Ready. Spanners, sound off and tell us all about yourself.
Hey guys, well I am the host of Missed Apex podcast. We're a Formula One podcast where we just chat about F1. But thank you very much for inviting me onto your show. I'm really interested in hearing the Australian perspective on things, because I've got a question for you guys straight away, if that's okay.
Go for it.
Right. What is it okay in Australia for the hosts of a F1 podcast to support the nation's drivers? And if it is okay, what's that like?
So, it's sort of an absurd question. Are you asking us, is it okay for us to support Daniel Ricciardo?
Yeah.
Of course, yeah. It's the thing that is discouraged is insane bias. But then again, that if you want to be like a lad cast, if you want to attract maybe the more boisterous fans, you would just be one-eyed and completely blind to all of his faults, which we all know he doesn't have any. So that's fine.
Yeah,
no,
but we
perfect.
get any stick.
I know where you're going with this.
Well, we get stick for showing any support for Lewis Hamilton whatsoever.
Right.
But I think because a few of us are like soccer fans. Do you guys call it soccer, don't you? Football fans.
Yeah, I can call it football now that I live here.
We're actually much harder, I think, on Lewis Hamilton when he's doing badly, because we feel disappointed because we've invested emotionally in his career and what he's doing, and we've given him our support. The problem is Lewis Hamilton's not done a great deal wrong for the last few seasons. So it comes across like they're with just this raving, loony, balmy, biased bunch. So Germany was a bit of a blessing, and Austria as well, because then we could prove, oh no, it was his fault. He hit all the curbs and he was terrible that race. See, we're not just weird fanboys.
I think it's been funny because it's something we've reflected on a little bit here, is that whilst we've been doing the show, or whilst especially I have been watching Formula One in any kind of consistency, we've been blessed to have 2 Australian Formula One drivers. And that is by no means a common thing for most people who watch Formula One, except if you're English, or maybe Brazilian. But the idea that, even I feel sorry for like Italians who have won essentially 2 big teams in the sport, one massive team, and they don't really have anybody to go for except their team and Giovinazzi. Heaven forbid you're from, the Netherlands, which you're lucky now. But really I think that maybe less bias and more about the amount of airtime that Daniel Ricciardo gets on our show, because it's something that we're always watching out for. And it's something I personally have struggled with a little bit this season, which is he hasn't really been in the news and he hasn't really been making an impact race weekend to race weekend. So there's always a bit of a patch in our Google Doc that is like, oh, hey, what did Daniel Ricciardo do? And it's like he drove around for 45 laps and then his car gave up on him. And that was kind of it. And he got it back to the pits and retired. Like that might be the extent of the news, or the extent of the coverage. So, especially because Australia's not a very big country. So our listenership is broadly, I would say, Rod, broadly US. There's listeners in Australia.
And then the UK
Germany,
and Australia
UK.
evenly, yeah.
Yeah. So really,
Australia is our third,
Yeah, that's interesting. I think it maybe because they're a podcast country or a radio country.
Yeah, we are, yeah.
Which makes sense.
English speaking as well makes a difference. But we've got a new Danish panelist, Christian, who's obviously from a country of 5 million as well. And it was interesting to hear how the country blew up when Magnussen came onto the scene. Because even though Denmark has a rich motorsport history, it hasn't had a huge amount of F1 drivers. So it was like, finally. I wonder what would happen to the Australian F1 fandom if Daniel Ricciardo, went back to Super Formula or went off to Indy. Do you think you'd still have that Australian F1 fan base?
He would completely become invisible, pretty much, because the Australian drivers that do really well in those other formulas, it's like who is that? Mark Webber, WEC, don't even know what that is. Just never even heard of it. Yeah, literally, he would just become like a ghost.
Yeah, but the sport itself, I don't think the followership is partly to do with Australian drivers. But I mean, we have, especially because the race is in Melbourne. I would argue Melbourne's the sporting capital of Asia, let alone Australia. And because of its impact, like the race has a massive impact on the culture of sport in Australia. And again, especially in Melbourne, that people follow along with the race, at least for that weekend. Australians are very happy to get involved in sport in any way, shape or form. We're a very sport preferential culture. And I'm sure that it would, when Mark Webber wasn't doing really well at Red Bull, I'm sure a bunch of people didn't even know that we had an Australian Formula One driver and yet still followed Formula One they knew what it was, could name maybe the best driver in the world or know that the race was on that weekend in Melbourne. So it's a bit of an interesting relationship. I think it's definitely grown as well with, the amount of Australians I've spoken to who have only just recently worked out that I do a Formula One podcast because they've watched Drive to Survive on Netflix. It's huge. Yeah. Have you seen any change in your listenership spanners based on that?
Yeah. I don't know if it's fully down to Drive to Survive, but we saw a huge spike around the time that came out. And then anecdotally, we hear people saying, oh, love the show. We got into F1 from Drive to Survive and then we searched F1 podcasts. And I think like the Americans are much more voracious with their podcast appetite. So like if they love a TV show, they'll go and find a podcast that's talking about that TV show. Yeah. So they found the F1 TV show and went looking. But yeah, it's had a huge effect, I think.
Yeah.
I think we had a huge spike in new listenership, but unfortunately it coincided with Zach saying some really controversial things and we had a huge dip at the same time. So it evened out.
Oh,
that's unfortunate, but he'll never learn.
He's your version of Matt Trumpets.
Yeah. Someone's going to be controversial on this show.
Someone's got to, I suppose. Yeah, all right. Well, uncontroversially, I'm going to try and get us back to the actual season at hand. And obviously the big news that we haven't had a chance yet to talk about, and Spanners, I'm going to give you the honours of giving us your first thoughts, is the big news that Pierre Gasly is out from Red Bull and Albon has been promoted from the junior team to the senior team. Tell us, first of all, I want to start with Gasly, first of all, before we progress on to the Toro Rosso driver promotion. So tell us about Gasly and why he does not deserve to be among the top 6 cars.
Yeah, deserves a funny word, isn't it? Because F1's very different to other sports. There's almost an entitlement once a driver becomes an F1 driver. We hold on to them as if they've got this, sport given right to be part of the F1 circus. And it's like Formula One drivers, they're much more like boxers than they are footballers. So if a footballer has a bad season, he'll go down to the reserves or drop down to a lower league team. But like with heavyweight boxers, once they lose a battle, so now Gasly's kind of lost his battle, it's like they're suddenly, they're not undefeated anymore and they're rubbish and they're completely written off. But if F1 was more of a meritocracy, we could talk more about deserve. And there's been I don't know if this is too harsh. There's been a bit of a Gasly pity party of like, he only had 6 months. And in that time, didn't perform at all. That's a huge amount of time in sport. Can you imagine a striker just not scoring any goals for Manchester United and then being retained? You'd drop him. But then he'd have an opportunity to perform in the reserves, go on loan to Bristol or something like that, and then come back. So Gasly just wasn't up to scratch. Now we're hearing a lot about his attitude, and he was blaming it on everything but himself. He was specifically told to change his driving style to adapt to the car. Didn't do that. So there's some sympathy because that car is blatantly going to be set up around Max Verstappen. But at the end of the day, he wasn't good enough. And I think what we might be seeing is that he was flattered a little bit. Oh, I see. I don't know what you guys think about New Zealand. Is New Zealand a bit like your Scotland? Like you politically, you like them, but
I think
really,
so, yes, yeah.
Yeah, so it's a bit of a sideways look like Gits. But, Hartley may have flattered Gasly last season, and then he's come up against like genuine raw talent, and it's just been difficult. And 6 months is a huge amount of time in sport. So no, for me, I think that was the right decision.
Yeah, I tend to agree. I think that it's not like he didn't have opportunities either. It's the opportunities that were missed where Max Verstappen has like grasped the opportunity and absolutely throttled it to death and been like, I am going to win this race by hell or high water. And Gasly just doesn't seem to have that same fight about him. And I hadn't necessarily thought about the Hartley comparison, but it does make sense that he was just made to look very good, or at least he was brought up in the same.
Made to look fine. Yeah,
made to look fine, and kind of brought up against some of that same generation of the Charles Leclerc generation of drivers who are like, oh, everybody from that age group who's made it into Formula One deserves a spot, and obviously has some talent to prove. But it won't take them too long to prove that, and when he gets his opportunity to do well, he will take it, and he didn't really. The fact that that Helmut Marko came out and said that we're not going to change our lineup, and then they kind of did, doesn't sit well with anybody, but it's not surprising anybody either. This is exactly what Red Bull does. They just keep mix and matching until they find somebody that works. And it turns out that more and more, there's more that haven't worked than do. Rod, I'd love to hear your opinion on Albon next, before I have a question about whether that's actually harming Red Bull around their young driver program. But I agree with you, Spanners, that Gasly has failed, and it's not like they've dropped him out of the sport. He has an opportunity at Toro Rosso. You can look next to him at Daniil Kvyat and go well, there's a man who's failed on multiple occasions in multiple ways, and yet finds himself. He was probably in a good position to get this Red Bull drive, and he had a caging interview a few weeks ago where he was like, I just want to do the best I can, and maybe more opportunities will come my way. It was almost like he knew that there was going to be an opportunity at Red Bull. And if I was him, I'd be pretty disappointed that I didn't get it, but I don't think it looks good from a media perspective. Rod, what do you think?
What if there was 30 spots on the... Sorry about this. It's hard because it's not on video. I do apologise. What if there was 30 spots on the grid and 10 of those spots were customer teams, and there was that pre-qualifying maybe for that second tier of car, and then you had drivers that could come in and show their worth in like a lower division, and then you could see, look, those drivers in the customer leagues, they're having their own little battle, and Gasly's doing really well there. Or no, Gasly got thumped by Hartley up in the Haas customer team. But think of all the drivers, think of all the great drivers who tried to get to F1 but didn't even get 6 months. So I think there's a lot of people out there who would be really happy with Gasly's 6 month shot against Verstappen and might have made a better fist of it.
the argument that F1 is a meritocracy has been sort of waning a lot lately. I mean, not just pay drivers, but also when you look at people like Ocon sitting on the sideline and people like, I don't know, maybe Lance Stroll driving around going like, oh, it's fun to have money. It's sort of a bit laughable to think that, yeah, we have the best 20 drivers in all those 20 seats. So this is sort of the problem for me with the Toro Rosso selection to promote Albon, which is they tried Kvyat. They kind of know what he can do. They sort of know how good he's going to be or not be. And they're sort of like, well, the only one we haven't really tried left now is Albon. Let's give him a go and just see what he can do. Because I think that Kvyat has been the more consistent driver. He's got the more outstanding performances with the podium. And the other thing that I would say is that he's sort of seen what happened to Kvyat. He knows that if you get promoted into Red Bull and then you fail and get promoted back down, it's bad news. So that's going to destroy Gasly, and it's also putting more pressure on Albon. And the other thing is, these people will say, I don't know, like, it's good to have drivers driving around in the lower tier, but they're just not ready to drive in the front running teams. But my problem with that would be, well, if you're not good enough to drive in the front running teams, what are you doing in the mid teams? What are you doing in the back market teams? I don't understand. It's only 20 seats on this grid. All of them should be good enough to be spearheading a front-running team. All of them. That's my opinion. So if you're not good enough to do that, well then, unfortunately, there's the exit.
There should be 20 Lewis Hamilton standard drivers minimum in the peak of motorsport.
Yeah, I think that was going to be my question, right? Is that for both of you, is that because of this kind of insatiable search for the next Lewis Hamilton, he's essentially the next Michael Schumacher, or replace Insane Driver that you love, Insanely Great Driver that you love into that mix. I think that we are just cycling through drivers or trying to just find the next person instead of putting the best drivers in the team. Now, Red Bull doesn't take anybody from outside of their program, essentially, right? They put Daniil Kvyat in and Brendan Hartley in. They've both been part of the Red Bull driver program before and then put not straight into the top team, but back into their feeder team. Spanners, do you think that how limiting is the fact that Red Bull's senior team only takes from their own stable of drivers?
Oh, yeah. No, I think it is limiting because they haven't got a logjam of young drivers coming through. So the only reason we're really seeing it as a bad thing at the moment is because, there isn't the next Alguersuari coming through to get quickly rejected. But personally, I'm not massively opposed to, hey, here's a top team with a lot of money. Yeah, sure, we've got our favorite driver, Vettel. He's our champion at the moment, and that's great. We'll bring young drivers in, see who's making the cut, and if we don't like it, if you don't take your one shot, same as Hollywood, same as trying to get into an academy as a 10-year-old footballer, then you're gone. Don't cry a river for Alguersuari. I'm sure he's fine. I'm sure he's having a lovely life. But at the moment, it's Verstappen. So I don't know what Red Bull is doing is fine. They're a giant organization within the sport. They've got their champ. They're backing him. But you cannot say that they're not giving other drivers a chance. So no, I don't see any problem.
Yeah, it's because, one of the reasons that this does kind of irk me is because you have teams like Red Bull saying that they necessarily can't compete against, Ferrari and Mercedes all the time. But they're in no position to win a drivers' championship if they're constantly putting in a second driver who is below the standards that, everybody complains about Bottas's relative lack of ability to just bring home 1-2s and podiums every single week, let alone putting in someone like Pierre Gasly, who there was no chat that he was the next Max Verstappen. And we're not even super confirmed that Max Verstappen is the next Vettel, and if Vettel was the next Schumacher. So the idea being that you can sustainably support a team at the top with one great driver and one, not even number two, but like very so-so, and that you would just continue to just kind of use that position to have drivers fight to the death over that position. I don't think it's a model that I would argue that Red Bull have been trying since Mark Webber retired. And there's just a graveyard of drivers who are not good enough in their mind. They've only found one. It's Max Verstappen. Everybody else has somewhat failed in that second driver role. Even Daniel Ricciardo, to some extent.
But isn't that the great thing about Formula? Look at that. We paused to be polite, and then we both came in at the same time.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what was happening. I was like holding the door open for you, Spanners, and you were just standing back like, what are we doing? Go here.
Go for it.
Well, I'm going to barge through the door then.
Do it.
And just quickly say, like, isn't that the great thing about Formula One, though? When you say no one was, backing Gasly to be the next Verstappen, is we get to see these things play out over the course of seasons and eras. And it is fantastic to think, actually, we're not absolutely 100% certain that Verstappen is the real deal until we, see him up against more drivers in more scenarios. It's taken a long time to unravel what I would call the Vettel myth as well. And then you brought up Bottas. We're putting together some statistics. And one of the scenarios I'm putting together for the last few seasons is, imagine that all of Bottas's performances with a maximum you could get out of a Mercedes in that race. And then we're taking Lewis Hamilton's result out and putting a Mercedes directly behind where Bottas finishes every race, and then seeing how the championship shakes out. So the second driver is vital, really.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, I can't wait to see that data.
Yeah, that'd be really interesting. And we'll retweet all that when it comes out and stuff. But, I think the second driver syndrome, I know we were just getting away from the Red Bull drivers, but the final point on Pierre Gasly was, I'm just going to drag us kicking and screaming back to Red Bull. The race in Hungary where Verstappen was in front of Hamilton and Hamilton had a country mile to pit and then charge back to the lead. When Verstappen was sort of vulnerable with no rear gunner, just seemed to have sealed Gasly's fate after just months and months of me and probably you, Spanners, and everybody saying, boy, Gasly really needs to put in a performance soon, to put in such a poor performance that he was not there. He was completely missing in action. And the one race where Verstappen needed a rear gunner and he just was not there.
Wasn't he fighting Albon that race?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, add it to the list of, I've got a list as long as my arm of lowlights from Gasly's season, including being overtaken by Toro Rosso. I mean, it's just whatever the opposite of a highlight reel is, it's that.
Okay. Well, so how do we rate Albon then, Spanners? Like, how much have you watched him, and how do you see things panning out for him in the second half of this season? Is he being given a grace period of 6 months and then he'll have that seat next year?
No, I don't think so. I don't think this is a grace period at all.
Really?
I think this is do or die. I think this is, hey, we've got other options for next season, including Danny Kvyat, including Pierre Gasly, if he somehow has a resurgence because I don't think they hate him. They've backed Gasly a lot this season. I think it's genuine when they say, we've got 4 teams, so we're lucky we can rotate drivers through. And basically, I think how they'll look at it is, we've now seen Verstappen, Albon, and Gasly in the 2019 car, and that'll give us the data we need for a 2020 decision. So I think Albon's got to hit the ground running. I think he's going to be treated every bit as harshly as all the other Toro Rosso drivers, and I hope he realises that as well.
Do you rate him?
Well, I mean, we've only had a little look, but when you've seen him wheel to wheel, he's looked pretty handy, hasn't he? He hasn't been drowned in pace by Daniel Kvyat.
No.
Daniil Kvyat, who everyone considers to be raw fast, as in just out and out, pace when he popped into the scene. Even, people were raving about him in practice 1 of 2014 Austin Grand Prix. So Albon's kept pace, hasn't looked lost at all, and has looked handy wheel to wheel. And, Kvyat got all the plaudits for that German GP podium, but that Albon was driving much better in that race. I think he's been the better of the two drivers. So he's got all the ingredients. We've seen Kvyat up against fast drivers, and we've seen Albon up against, Kvyat. So, that doesn't always pan out, but it looks like we've got the logical progression here to give us hope to say, I think Albon is going to be up nearer Verstappen. So basically his orders will be stay in Hamilton's pit window. And if Verstappen gets another chance to win, you are going to be left out there and hassle Hamilton. And I think that's fine. He's got to accept that this season.
Yeah. Don't be a minute off the pace. Just stay in contention and stay around there. And, he seems like the interviews I've seen with him, he seems like a very marketable guy, very personable. I'm sure he'll just push himself into that team in a very calm and nice way. He also doesn't come with any no one's. I wonder how you said they'll be harsh on him, and they will be. But I wonder if how high the expectations will be. I don't think it'll be a grace period as much as people might. I think that Red Bull's leadership might kind of look at him and say the bar might not be quite as high as it was for Gasly because you've had no preseason, you've had no testing in this car really. You're just jumping in, make a go of it. But that's a very Red Bull style, right? Just give it a crack. And if you perform very well, there's all the prizes are here for you. It's a team that rewards people who do well immediately, even if they can't necessarily sustain it. If they can provide some highlights, they tend to stick with them for a bit, which is seemingly the Red Bull way, a highlights package. So yeah, Rod, what do you think of Albon?
Yeah, I mean, I pretty much think Albon's he's rusted on for this year and next year, pretty much lock it in because he would have to flip that car and literally, do a Fast and Furious style burnout before they pull him out of that team. He is in there to stay. I don't care if Pierre Gasly wins a race this year in the Toro Rosso. It's Albon next year for sure. But I mean, we mentioned before how Toro Rosso and Red Bull, they've got 4 seats and Red Bull have a plethora of drivers. The team that only has 2 seats is Mercedes, and they have more seats than they have drivers, unfortunately. Heard Valtteri Bottas recently say that his plan A is to stay at Mercedes, but if that doesn't pan out for whatever reason, Ocon, he's got a plan B and a plan C. So, Spanners, what do you think his plan B and plan C is, and which is most likely?
Okay, so bit of conflicting input from our 2 guests on Missed Apex podcast recently. So we have Matthew Carter, who was the effectively team principal for Lotus F1 for 2 seasons. And he said he very nearly mouthed the source's name, because we do a video version as well, and then stopped himself just in time. But it was a good source that said the deal was done. And as far as he was concerned, Ocon was going to Mercedes in 2020.
Interesting.
However, Joe Sayward, him off of GP Plus magazine, came on and just went, no, nonsense, rubbish, nothing's been decided yet. I will start by saying it's so harsh to say we're going to make the decision in the summer and then have all that scrutiny for 2 races of Valtteri Bottas just looking like a kicked puppy. And obviously 2 nightmare races as well for him. Like, what if they were going to make the decision in the summer? Just make the decision in the summer. No one was forcing them to say, we're deciding. Because what you're effectively saying is, not sure about this bloke. Let's see how it goes for 2 races.
Yeah. Just going to sleep on it for about 4 or 5 weeks.
Yeah. I mean, so Esteban Ocon, though, is an interesting choice because, I mean, I know he's been around the racing a lot. He's obviously a talent, but that's going to be a hot seat because if he doesn't immediately provide something better than what Bottas was providing, which is slow and steady and good qualifying pace, which you've spoken about on your show, in that he can kind of pull it out 1 lap pace on a Saturday, which is very, very important.
But not every time.
Yes, but and he's just not that quality of driver. And will he ever be? I don't know. But he is in the best car. So, there's the unfortunate thing is you can look across. Sorry, go on.
He's not even the qualifying threat that Rosberg was. Like, Rosberg's qualifying record against Hamilton is way better than Bottas's is. So, when he's good, granted, but he's just not in that same class.
Yeah, but he's not as fiery as Ocon is. Like, Ocon gets on the radio and gets angry at other drivers where Bottas is finish, and you never hear that. And he's very pliable. He kind of does what he's told. Ocon's going to see this as his opportunity to be the number 1 driver once Hamilton, does literally anything else, which could be in 20 years' time at this rate, until he's sick of driving a Formula 1 car, which doesn't seem to be in any time soon. So Ocon's going to be punchy. And so I think it's a risky move. And I could see the hesitation from higher up at Mercedes as opposed to just Toto Wolff wanting someone to turn up and finish second behind Hamilton every race weekend.
Oh, so you're looking at it from the Mercedes point of view, from the management point of view. I would be really, really tempted because Bottas is fine as long as you're not expecting him to win a championship for you. I'd have been tempted just to, downplay it. Downplay your doubts in Bottas. Sure, you're going to favour Hamilton. Move your development cycle to him. Kind of let it be leaked out that Hamilton really is the number 1 driver. Bottas is doing a great job though. Because if you were a young driver now with Ocon's reputation and you had a straight fight seat, do you want the number 2 seat alongside Hamilton or the number 2 seat alongside Vettel? I think you would have to go to Vettel, even though it's a slower car. Go and spank Vettel for 3 seasons or for 2 seasons, drum him out of the sport, have a fantastic reputation, rather than, like Bottas, coming out of Williams with a great reputation. He had a fantastic reputation. He'd just shown Massa the door of F1, and people liked Massa. And Bottas, he's come in and he's looked ordinary, not in qualifying necessarily, but on race pace. And just that consistent lap after lap, race after race, relentlessness that Hamilton has. Bottas has looked ordinary. So he's damaged now. Like, his reputation, like we said about the heavyweight boxers, is completely gone. If you suddenly have Ferrari needing a number 1 driver, they're not going to Bottas. And I think Ocon, he's going to risk the same thing. Did we really see Ocon destroy Perez? Not really, no. So how do we think he's going to fare against Hamilton? I would imagine much the same as Rosberg got smashed on race pace and Bottas got smashed on race pace.
Yeah,
I just think it's the same.
We're going to see Ocon going hard into T1, but Bottas doesn't do that. Bottas goes, make sure you've got all the room, Lewis. You've got you can breathe and you can see me and I can see you. Whereas Ocon's going to be like, I'm going to win this race. If Ocon can qualify, in the top 4 next season, he'll be going in hard those first few laps and not really giving the space that I think Bottas affords. I think Bottas wears the media very well. He wears the I know I'm number 2. I haven't won any world championships. I'm with the best guy of the modern era. The expectation is that I finish second every single race, and I know he knows his bar. He came back from the break over the winter with his beard, and he was like, I can win the world championship. But that was all bluster, part hyping himself up. But really, I think it was just to make a somewhat interesting story. But really, he knows he's the number 2 driver there. Whereas you're right, if Ocon went to Ferrari and could duke it out with Vettel, much like Ricciardo did at Red Bull, pushed Vettel out at Red or put a full stop at the end of Vettel's career at Red Bull. And if Ricciardo didn't necessarily have someone like Verstappen coming up next, I think there's every chance Ricciardo would be the number 1 driver at Red Bull sitting there, because he could see off Kvyat, Albon, Hartley, and Gasly. We know that much. So it depends how it plays out. But I think it's a poison's chalice going to Mercedes at this point, because Hamilton doesn't look like he'll retire for another 3 or 4 years, in all seriousness.
Can I ask you a historical question, just to put into context what you thought of that? Because obviously Rosberg did get his elbows out. He was very rude into turn 1, and particularly say turn 3 in Barcelona. But I mean, even though obviously he nicked that championship, you'd be very hard pressed to say that he could live with Hamilton's general race pace. And he lost out in every wheel-to-wheel bit of action. So that might not help Ocon if you don't have the raw race pace.
Yeah, but no one does.
The thing that I would say about Ocon, and I'm certainly not the first person to say this, is that in a number 2 driver up against someone of the caliber of Lewis Hamilton, you do need someone to push him. And Lewis Hamilton does have a tendency to kind of drift away and become a little bit more anonymous when he's either not in contention for the championship or smashing it in the championship. He's just drilling it every week. All of a sudden, he just sort of has a race where he comes 7th or 8th and he goes, I wasn't feeling it. And it's like, what do you mean you weren't feeling it? He needs a good number 2 driver to just keep him a little bit sharper. The other thing I would say is, let's just say hypothetically, Mercedes forget how to build a car in a couple of years. I know that's not likely. I know it's not likely, but let's just say that happens. All of a sudden, it's Ferrari and Red Bull challenging each other for the constructors, and Mercedes are the ones who have got to say to both of their drivers, look, we don't really care who wins, but it's up to one of you to get out there and get amongst it, get your elbows out, and it's no more number 2 and number 1 driver anymore. It's every man for themselves. That's a scenario that I think you would rather have Ocon on your side than Bottas.
Interesting. Well, we touched on Ferrari a little bit there. That was one of the last questions I kind of wanted to finish on as far as a framing for second half of the season conjecture. We've got I'm not going to use the word resurgent for Vettel, but we've got a more expectation meeting Sebastian Vettel, or at least getting close to our expectations. We've got a Charles Leclerc who's just battered, bruised, and can't really hook it up for a whole weekend and can't really put together what we're all expecting would be, we're expecting his career to be fantastic, and he's just not quite achieving that. But you could say that about Ferrari forevermore. Spanners, where do you think Ferrari's going to go for the second half of this season? Or are they too prideful to let it go, or are they going to start thinking about 2020?
Well, I'm fairly neutral when it comes to Ferrari. No, I get loads of sticks. I give Ferrari a really hard time. There are some really passionate Ferrari fans, and bless them, they have been.
Really?
Oh man, honestly, my son asked me, Dad, do Ferrari fans love their children? And I said, no, not like we do, son. Not like we do. But they are very passionate, the Ferrari fans, and I feel really bad for them. They've been through the ringer. And they've just got this really stubborn philosophy. Binotto was reported to have said it's not a philosophy. However, he did acknowledge that they should have gone for more downforce. So you've got the team principal of Ferrari saying, yeah, we should have gone for more downforce. In this era of Formula One, where high downforce has always trumped high top speed, obviously there's the odd track exception. But I was trying to think back, and I asked, I think, on social media earlier in the week, when's the last time that a high speed, low drag philosophy won in Formula One? Obviously, you need to, well, I say obviously, armchair, team principal here, but it seems obvious that you need to just bolt on as much downforce as your budget and development will allow. And do you remember when Hamilton came to Mercedes in 2013? And he was a little bit down on occasions. Every interview, he was just going, just need more downforce. Just need more downforce. Because he'd come from that McLaren, which was a high downforce philosophy. The Red Bull one with Vettel. Yeah. Vettel won with high downforce and traction control. Oh, sorry, allegedly. But you know what I mean? So to hear Ferrari come out like that, I was just like, are you kidding me? I just think they're lost. It doesn't matter whether they give up now and develop the next year's car or whether they keep pushing this season. I just don't see them coming back at all.
Yeah, and the door's open then for Red Bull, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
it's just hard to see Ferrari winning a race. I mean, we've got sort of Spa, Monza coming up, which, if they can't win there, they're just not going to win anywhere, are they?
No, and they can't win in Singapore if they haven't got the downforce. So that's not really going to work either. Like the time when the playing field gets a bit leveled. Maybe it'll be an incredible race weekend for Alexander Albon. Maybe that's when he'll get his first race race win or podium.
He's more likely to win a race than Vettel is, isn't he?
Yeah, and because you just can't. Yeah, I just.
Oh wow! What a point!
Mercedes. It's a great way to think about it, though. I'd take that bet.
That is a killer point. I'm going to tweet that quickly as if it was my opinion.
Oh man!
Yeah, Albon to win a race before Vettel is a decent bet.
Yeah. That would secure Albon's spot for the next 2 years, or at least the next 2 months. So is there any, are there any other, Spanish, did you have any more questions for us, or is there any other points you'd like to touch on for the rest of the season? Anything you think our listeners should be watching out for?
Yeah.
Well, I don't know. I think the Haas battle, isn't it? That's something to look out for, because we're seeing the decline of Grosjean's career, and naturally you think this should be it. If you look at his performances over the last couple of years and just some of the outright ridiculous things he's done, the strewing of all the parts all over the track, the failing to get out of the pit lane, was that in Silverstone? It's just been a comedy of errors, and he's not had the performance. And I like a bit of a gamble responsibly when the fun stops, and all the rest of it. I like a gamble. And one of the markets I do look at for a cheeky punt, is the first driver to retire. And that is a bit more like, it's more like a roulette wheel, that bet. However, I've never seen shorter odds for a driver to be the first to retire than you get for Romain Grosjean. He is consistently down at 11, 12, 13 to 1 to be the first driver out. And and he's always like the favourite by a long way. And you just go, it's gotta be the end. And, there's that cliche of, once a driver has kids, they slow down. And I can buy that, because babies are terrible. They're awful, awful, disgusting monsters that suck the life out of you. So I just think it's done for Grosjean. You guys not fathers?
No, Rod is.
I've got a 1.5-year-old, and definitely my hopes of becoming a Formula One driver have plummeted in the last 2 years.
Yeah, and I'm only putting it off because there's still a slight glimmer that I'll get a Toro Rosso seat, or maybe this Haas seat that might open up, because I'm no worse than Romain Grosjean. I've won as many races as he has, right? But
then the what's his name? Sweary man, Günther Steiner has said, we don't want to take a risk on a rookie because our car's so bad. Yeah. So I think, Grosjean is just going to be left in that seat, and it's just a horror show. He's going to become a joke, I think. And I fear for him, because he seems really, really nice.
Well, I really read that comment as Yeah, I read that comment as we just need experienced drivers who will tell us what's wrong with the car because we don't know. But I just don't know that Grosjean is that kind of driver either. I don't know that he plays that role very well.
Well, we have some insight. Matthew Carter was his team principal, and he's spoken to us. Or now I have to remember what he said offline and what he said on the podcast. I don't think he's overly impressed with Romain Grosjean as a development driver, and I think he's alluded to the fact that they've tried different parts and it's not made a difference. And their test driver at the time would extract more time out of the new part, and they'd go, glad we gave it to the test driver.
Yeah, maybe they should just... there's a Marcus Ericsson floating around who's got some Formula 1 experience. They could slip into that team, and then they could just be the Ericsson Magnussen team, the Sons of Haas. That'd be all right. I'd watch that. That's a great call. Romain Grosjean. I just don't think he's got anything else to do. Cycle and cook.
The story's finished, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's it.
He's going to become a French TV chef or something, isn't he?
Yeah. He'll host a show. He'll host a show for 10 weeks of the year or something. Guest celebrity, morning show, stand-in, that kind of thing. I like that. I'm going to go have a look at that same market as well.
Maybe to wrap things up, we'll just throw open the floor. If anyone wants to throw anything on the ground in a mad scramble before we wrap up, feel free to do so right now.
I just wanted to ask you guys who you thought were the worst fans out of all the driver fans in F1 in recent history.
I'm going to get in so much trouble.
Come on, don't be. I would never do this on my podcast, but who do we think?
I'm going to jump in because my one insight is that the few times I've hung around with real Formula One insiders, journalists and otherwise, and these are some of the worst fans, I think. Fucking Kubica fans. Everyone thinks he's God's gift to fucking racing. It's like, he was the greatest of all time. He could drive anything that had more than one wheel. Put him on a unicycle. He'll ride that thing around Spa and win the race. He's so bloody good. And I said immediately, I was like, his comeback will do nothing. Like it's going to be incredibly difficult for him to drive. He's not anywhere close to the speeds that development drivers have in testing. And everyone's like, no, you wait and see. He'll get points. One wet race and he'll pull that car over the line. And I know the Williams sucks, but he's not only is he's has difficulty racing due to his arm injury, but also he's just not that quick anymore. He's old. So it's Robert Kubica fans who will defend him to the hilt because they saw a glimmer of what could have been. But Formula One is full of what could have been. Romain Grosjean was a what could have been at one point in his career. So's Chico Perez. And so is Kevin Magnussen. They all are. But most of them don't do it. So it's, for me, Robert Kubica fans.
Oh, you've fallen into my trap. Any listeners of who are Robert Kubica fans, come over to Missed Apex podcast. We love Robert Kubica.
All 15 of them.
We think that he's driving a different car to George Russell, and George Russell's getting all the best bits. No, but guys,
clearly.
Seriously, thank you so much for inviting me onto your show. I'd love to have you guys in the podcasting shed as well.
Yeah.
To come and chat F1 with us on Missed Apex.
We'd love to be there. Thank you so much.
And please, before you go, tell everyone where they can follow all of your stuff, tell them what they should be subscribing to, and tell them how they can get more spanners in their life.
Oh, yeah, that's a great goal. Thank you very much for the opportunity. Yeah, at Spanners Ready on Twitter or at Missed Apex F1. You can join us in the Missed Apex F1 podcast Facebook group as well if you want to chat F1. And I also do a little Saturday show where I talk about life and sport, and I just use it as a grumbling platform. Everything I want to complain about through the week, I get to go on BBC Radio Cambridgeshire and just complain. So if you search for Richard Reddy BBC, you can catch my Saturday show on the BBC Sounds app as well.
So sorry, Kubica fans. The views of Zach do not represent the views of the Super License Corporation. I for one think that Kubica's head is perfectly normal shaped, and there's nothing wrong with these formulas here.
Wow, I thought we'd set off air that you you wanted me to bring this up because you didn't want the heat, but you secretly really agree with me that Kubica is just no good. Well, you know what? It's the only disagreement we've had on this show. Probably the only time that we have any. Yeah, I mean, we're best friends in every other and see exactly the same point of view in every other situation. We both feel exactly the same about Lewis Hamilton, that he's the greatest driver of all time. We both feel exactly the same about Fernando Alonso, that he should still be at McLaren and leading that team and doing the best that he possibly can, that if he could just get the right car, that he's obviously the best driver on the track, and that Daniel Ricciardo is a pretty poor racer. So we agree on everything, just like always. That was a good F1 chat. Like, I feel like we really put in a lot of F1 thinking for something that was mid-season. So I feel like it was even more taxing than our usual show.
Yeah, I don't know about more taxing. This is like if you're used to working out and then all of a sudden you just get a chance to just ride the bike for half an hour. Like, you take it. That's good.
Yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm. Well, look, I'm, if you haven't told, I'm definitely in summer break mode. It's very late at night here as well. So, as we said, there's no quiz. We're going to be wrapping up very soon, but the next race, I'm sure, will be right around the corner. I want to say thank you very much to the Super License Club members who keep the show running. I want to say thank you very much to anyone who's bought any merch from our shop recently, because we recently got a very, very nice email just saying that we'd made a very, very small but a sizable amount of money, more money than I spent on food on that day. So thanks to anyone who's been supporting the show through those methods. And man, it's just so encouraging to keep going and doing this crazy little thing that we do. When you see those little emails come through with people saying how much they appreciate the show and they have supported us either by supporting the club or buying something.
Yeah, everybody always does such a good job of letting us know that they're enjoying the show. And there's no better way than to let us know than, jumping on Facebook group or tweeting at us or giving us a review on iTunes or buying some merch. If it takes your fancy, it helps support the show. Jumping on Patreon, becoming a Super License Club member. We'll have an episode of Drift coming up very soon, which is good, which is the other show that we do just for our Patreon subscribers, our Super License Club members, where we set a timer and we pick an F1 jumping off point and we see where the conversation takes us, which is basically, it takes us. God, it takes us everywhere, which is always a lot of fun. And there's some of the best shows from an enjoyment perspective that I love making, which is why we do this, because we love making it. So,
I've got a really fun concept in mind for the next time we get to do that. But you'll have to subscribe if you want to find out what it is.
I better subscribe, yeah.
You better subscribe. Well, Zach, it's time for you to go back to selecting your Hawaiian shirts and drinking out of coconuts and stuff or whatever the hell you do during summer. Everyone, hope everyone's having the best summer of your life. And, we'll see you all when the next Formula One race ramps back up. Anything to leave us on, Zach?
I mean, are we just all super excited to see Albon win Spa? I am. So I hope you are as well.
Yeah, remember where you heard it first. Albon will run a race this year before Vettel does, or even next year. You heard it there first on the Super License podcast. Patent pending. That's not even a thing you can patent. Anyway, enough talking from me. Until next time, my name's been Rod.
And my name's been Zach.
Thanks for listening, and we'll see you after Spa. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.